इंट्रोडक्शन, ये सारी चीज़ें जो हैं मैं आज बात करूँ ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज़ के इस वीडियो में बताऊँगी। सबसे पहले देखते हैं ट्रांसलेशनल स्टडीज़। ट्रांसलेशन इज़ अ perceived as an instructive part of a foreign language teaching process. It has a really been study for its own sake. किसी भी फॉरेन लैंग्वेज को सीखना और उस सूरत में सीखना कि आपको उसका शौक हो, ठीक है, वो ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज़ परसीव करती है उस तरीके से। ट्रांसलेशन involves the reading of source language into the target language so as to ensure that अब ट्रांसलेशन जो है इन्वॉल्व होती है सोर्स लैंग्वेज, एक हमारी सोर्स लैंग्वेज होती है, ठीक है, और एक होती है हमारी टारगेट लैंग्वेज। द सरफेस मीनिंग ऑफ द two will be approximately similar and the structure of SL will be perceived as closely as possible but not so closely that the TL structure will be seriously disordered. Okay, and in the next slide, source language. What is source language? The language being translated from, okay, and what is translated target language, the language being translated to. एग्जाम्पल जो है हमारे पास है तुर्किश इंग्लिश। अब जो सोर्स लैंग्वेज है वो क्या है, जिसकी से हम लोग ट्रांसलेशन कर रहे होते हैं, और जिस टारगेट लैंग्वेज होती है जिसकी हम लोग ट्रांसलेशन करने जा रहे होते हैं। ये जिससे कर रहे होते हैं, जिसकी करने जा रहे होते हैं ट्रांसलेशन, ठीक है। नेक्स्ट है ट्रांसलेशनल स्टडी। Almus paper refers to many key aspects of translation. It talks of translation as a process, what happens in the act of translating the ST, product analysis of the teaching, a function, how the teaching operates in a particular context. Okay. Development of translational study. In 1990, it can best be seen as the establishment of series of new alliances that brought together research into the history, practice, and philosophy of translation with the other intellectual trends. The link between translational study and post-colonial theory represented one such alliances. So do the links between translation studies and corpus linguistics. Okay, this is the development of translational study. किस तरीके से translational study develop की गई थी, ठीक है। Development of translational studies. Any other scientific alliances is that between translational studies and gender studies for language, Simon points out, does not simply mirror reality but intervenes in the shaping of meanings. Okay, translators are directly involved in that shaping process, whether the text they are dealing with is an instructional manual, a legal document, a novel, or a classical drama. Just as a gender study challenged the notion of a single and file concept of a culture by asking awkward questions about way in which musical traditions are formed. So translational study through its many alliances asks questions about what happens when a text is translated from source to target culture. Okay. Approaches to translation. A translation must give the ideas of the original. A translation should read like an original work. A translation should read like a translation. A translation should reflect the style of the original. A translation should possess the style of original. A translation should read as a contemporary of the original. A translation may add it to or omit from the original. Okay. So these are the approaches जिनको हेल्प करते हैं ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज़ कर सकते हो, ठीक है। ट्रांसलेशन प्रॉपर describe the process of transfer from SLA to TL. Jackson goes on immediately to point the central problem in all types that while messages may serve as an educated interpretation of code, unit, or message, there is an ordinary no full equivalent through translation. Even an apparent synonym does not yield equivalence, and Jackson show how intellectually translation often has to resort a combination of code units in order to fulfill interpret the meaning of a single unit. Hence, a dictionary of a so-called synonyms may give perfect as a synonym for idea or vehicle as a synonym for a conveyance, but in neither case can there be said to be completed equivalences, since each unit contains within itself a set of non-transferable association and connection. Okay. A general area of interest, each with a degree of overlap. Two are product oriented in the emphasis is on function aspects of the TL text in relation to SL text, and two of them are process oriented. Okay, in that emphasis is on analysis what actually take place during the translation. History of translation. So now we read the history of translation. It is a component part of literary history. The type of a work involved in this area includes investigate of the theory of translation at a different times, the critical response to translation, the particular process of common sensing and publishing translation, the role and a function of a translation in a given period, the methodology developed of a translation, and by far the most common type of a studies, analysis of the work of individual translation. Translation in the culture extend to the work on a single text or author have included work on the influences of a text, author or a genre on the absorption of the norm of the translated text into the TL system, the principles of selection operating within that system. Okay. Translation and linguistics. It includes studies which place their emphasis on the comprehensive arrangement of linguistics element between SLA and the TL text with regards to phonemic, morphemic, lexical, statement, and syntactic level. Into this category comes study and of a language bounded mean of a linguistics understandability of a machine translation extra, and also studies of the translation problems of non-literary text translation and poetics included the whole area of literary translation, investigate of the particle problem of translation, property, thread text are liberty and the applicated problems of translation for the cinema, whether dubbing or subtitling. Under this category also comes study of the poetic of individual translation and comprehensive between them, study of the problem of formulated poetics and a study of the interrelationship between SLA and TL text and author, translator, reader. Above all, in this section come studies attempting to formulate a theory of literary translation. Language and culture. What is the relation between language and culture? The first step towards an examination of the process of translation must be accepted. Okay, although translation has a central core of linguistics activity and belongs most probably to synonyms. Okay, since that studies sign systems are structure, sign process and sign functions, structuralism and semantics. Okay, beyond the notion stressed by the Norley linguistics approach that translation involves the translated translation transfer, meaning contained in one set of language sign into any other set of language sign through competent use of the direct dictionary and grammar. The process involves a whole set of extra linguistics criteria. Okay. Edward Spray dams that language is a guide to a social reality. Okay, and that human beings are the mercury of the language that has become the medium of the expression of their society. Experiences has expressed is largely determined by the language habit of the common community, and each separate structure represent a separate reality. No two languages are ever sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same social reality. The world in which different societies live are distinct words, not merely the same word with a different label attached. Types of translation. Here we discuss the types of translation. In his article on linguistics aspects of translation, Roman Jackson dismissed there are three types of translation. Intralingual translation are rewarding an interpretation of a verbal sign by means of other signs in the same language. And intralingual translation are a translation proper an interpretation of a verbal sign by means of some other languages. Intersemiotic translation and interpretation of a verbal sign by the means of signs of non-verbal sign system are transmutation. Example: music are image, intralingual intersemitic translation. There is a potential confusion of translation with interpreting. The potential field and the issues covered by translation are vast and complex. Bentival is the translation of a welcome, but how to do we explain. Translation also exists between different varieties of the same language and into what might be considered less conventional language such as sign language and Morse code. Okay. What about the flag symbol being understood as a country, nationality, or a language? Is that translation too? Such visual phenomena are seen on the daily basis. Non-smoking or existing signs in a public places are icons and symbols on the computer science. Examples: Harry Potter children books have been translated into over 14 languages and have sold millions of copies worldwide. The first book in the series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, 1997, appeared as a Harry Potter at the Stone in USA, as well as the title. There were other lexical changes. British lamps become American cookies. For the American edition make a few alteration of a grammar and syntax, such as a replacing got by cotton, divide by Davo, and weekend by on weeks, and gradually simplifying the sentence structure. In this practical case, it is not translation between two languages. Between various dialects of the same language. This is a term intralingual translation in the Roman Jacobson Tipuli. In Hebrew translation of the same book, the translation chose to subtitle the British word with a traditionally sweet, a kind of marshmallow. This is a term intellectually translation. Okay. So example of intralingual translation: lift, elevator, lorry or truck, tin can, television, tube, subway. Okay. Example of interlingual translation: in the case of hello, it is pointed out the English does not distinction between face-to-face greeting or that on the phone, whereas some other languages like French, Italian, Japanese, and German makes this distinction. In Japanese is hello, but when answering a phone, they say mush mush. Okay, the process of transforming writing text from SLA to TL conducted by a translators in a specific socio-cultural context. Okay. The written product or a TT which result from that process, and which functions in the socio-cultural context of PL, the cognitive linguistics, visual cultures, and ideological phenomena which are integral part of 1 and 2. Okay. Decoding and recoding. The translator therefore operates criteria that transcend the purely linguistics, and a process of decoding and recording take place. Engine needs model of the translation processes illustrate the stage involved. Here is the structure of decoding and recording diagram. Social language, text translation, and spectral language. So first analysis, then transfer, then restructuring and respective language. Okay. An example of some of the complications involved in the intralingual translation of what might seems to be uncontroversial items considers the questions of translation. Okay. And this take will seem the first glance to be straightforward, since all over the Indonesia Indo-Europe language closely related to lexical and syntactic, and the terms of creating an sentence are a common of all three. For yes, standard French, German, Italian. Okay. Problems of equivalence. The translation of idioms takes us a stage further in considering the question of meaning and translation. For idiom like poems and a culture bound, the Italian idiom manner ill can really provide a good example of the kind shift that takes place in the translation process. Translated literally, the sentence "Guilensis Mandol Campilla" become John letting his dog around the threshing floor. Four types of translation equivalence. First, linguistics equivalence, where there is a homogeneity on the linguistics level of both SLA and TL words or word translation. Okay. And the elements of grammar, word of word translation, pragmatics equivalence, where there is a equivalences of the element, where there is equivalence of the element of a pragmatics expressive access element of the grammar. Okay, and being higher category than lexical equivalence. Stylistic equivalence, where there is a functional equivalence of elements in both original and translation, aiming at an expressive identity with an inferred of identical meaning. Number 4 has textual equivalence, where there is equivalence of semantic structure of the text. Okay. And next is translation. Albrecht Dürer, whose work on translation is unfortunately not available to English readers, and works on translation is unfortunately not available to English reader. Distinction between the study of translation as a process and as a product. He stated bluntly that the missing link between both components of a completed theory of translation appears to the theory of translation appears to the theory of equivalence relation that can be to be the theory of equivalence relation that can be convinced for both the dynamic and static models. Next slide is loss and gain. Once the principle is expected, the semblance can't exist between two languages. It becomes possible to approach the question of the loss and gain in the translation process. It is again an indication of the low state of translation that so much time should have been spent on discussing what is lost in the transfer of the text from SLA to TL, while ignoring what can also be gained. Moreover, what is often seen as a lost from the SLA context may be replaced in a TLA context. And next is untranslatability. When such difficulties are encountered by the translator, the whole issues of translating of the text is raised. Cathford definition two types of the untranslatabilities which we term linguistics and culture. One, the linguistics level untranslatability occur when there is no lexical syntactical instability occur when there is no lexical and statistical substructure in TLA form and SLA atom. Okay. And next is example. The German User Mansi, Morgan Wickel are the Danish term for derived and linguistics untranslatable because both sentences involve structures that does not exist in English. Science as secondary activity. The purpose of a translation theory then is to the rich and understanding of the process undertaken in the act of translation and not as is so commonly misunderstood to provide as a set of norms for effective the perfect translation. In the same way, literary criticism does not seek to provide a set of instructions for producing the ultimate poem or novel, but rather to understand the internal and external structure operating within and around a work of art. Okay. The pragmatic dimension of translation can't be categorized any more than the inspiration of the text can be defined as a perceived one. This point is expected. Two issues that contain to bit while translation study can be satisfied resolve the problem of whether there can be a science of translation and whether translation is a secondary activity. Okay. The myth of translation as a secondary activity with all the association of the lower status implicated in that assessment can be dispelled once the extent of the pragmatic elements of translation is suspected and once the relationship between the author, translator, reader is outlined. A diagram of the communication relationship between the process of translation shows that the translate is both receive and emitted, the end and the beginning of the two separate but linked chain of a communication. Okay, so here is author, text, receiver, translator, text, receiver. The keys of translation studies and for translation itself is summed up by Octave Peirce in his short work on a translation. All text, he claimed, being a part of a literary system descended from and related to other systems, are translation of a translation of translation. Translation. Every text is unique and at the same time it is a translation of any other text. No text is entirely original because language itself in its essence is already a translation, firstly of the nonverbal word and secondarily since every sign and every phrase is the translation of any other sign and any other phrase. However, this argument can be turned around without losing any of its utility. Every translation up to certain point is an invention as a such or it consistent and unique text. Okay, so this is a translation study. Next slide देखते हैं. Okay, translational development, history and early theories, the nature of translation, and word-to-word sentence translation and interpretation. So textual product, discourse context, text seen as a language in use and a context as a social culture. Scopes theory, it provides an insight into the nature of translation as a purposeful activity which is directly applicable to every translation project. Basic types of a text: informative text, which convey information, and basic types of a text: expressive text, which communicate through in a creative way, operative text, which pursued translation engagement in interaction schemes, registers, discourse, genre, text. Fans, Poncheko, translation, interpreting discourse, cognitive processing, interculture mediation, ethics, qualities, training, technology, history, interpreting studies, linguistics plus sociology, cognitive plus social science, quantitative plus qualitative. Ford Harder plus Fabio Ellipse, 6 complete method, IGT, Bell's linguistics, psycholinguistics method, Curley sociological mode, while decision making method, get on relevance theories, Gill effect method. Okay. Next is David Catron, The Harman's translation as a re-encounter responsibilities, accountabilities, and ethics. Machine translation, corpus linguistics, translation memory system, terminology, controlled language, transformation in the communicals translation section, pursuit translation, attitudes, objective of a practice, adequacy of a theory, and media reflection, text production, language communication. Okay, so this is a consequent translation, the act of intention relation. Tripolia of Jobson in 1959 and 2000. Intralingual translation, a rewording, is an interpretation of a verbal sign of other signs of the same language. Intralingual translation, or a translation proper, is an interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other languages. Intrasemantic translation of a transmission in an interpretation of a verbal sign by means of a non-verbal sign system. Intralingual translation. Consider the following example of intralingual translation. Policeman, there has been an accident. I headed and a grandmother from Texas. A Danish restaurant received many international guests and communication a translation to translate its Danish menu into English. Stage of translation theory. The linguistic stage up to 1950, communication stage around 1950, and the functionalist stage around 1970, the ethical aesthetic stage around 2000. Baker 2006, evidence at a word level, evidence above word level, grammatical evidence, textual evidence, thematic informative structures, coherence, pragmatic evidence, and Hatim and Monday, the unit of translation studies, the analysis of a meaning, textual pragmatics and evidence, translation and relevance. So word for word translation, literary translation, faithful translation, semantic translation, SL emphasis and TL emphasis adaptation, free translation, idiomatic translation, communicative translation. Okay, so these are the translation studies. And in the next slide, ट्रांसलेशन जो है वो प्रोडक्ट भी होती है, प्रोसेस भी होती है, और ट्रांसलेशन एज अ प्रोडक्ट, ट्रांसलेशन एज अ प्रोसेस. ओके, and this is the translation as a process. What is translation? Definition of translation. Translation is a phenomenon that has a huge effect on everyday life. If we look at a general dictionary, we find that the following definition of the term translation: the act or an instant of translating a written or a spoken expression of the meaning of a word, speech, book, extra in any other language. The
first of these two senses related to translation as a process, the second to the product. Okay. The immediate meaning that the term's translation encompasses very distinct perspective. The first sense focuses on the role of a translator in taking the original or source text and turning it into a text in any other language. The target text treaty. The second sense centers on the concrete translation product produced by the translator. The distinction is drawn out by the definition in the specialist dictionary. Translation studies. Translation, an incredible bold notion which can be understood in many different ways. For example, when we talk of a translation as a process or a product and identify such as subtypes as a literary translation, technical translation, subtitling, and machine translation. Moreover, while translation is an incalculable code notation which can be understood in many different ways. For examples, one may talk of translation as a process or a product and identify such as the subtypes as a literary translation, technical translation, subtitling, and machine translation. Moreover, while more typically it just refers to the transfer of written text, the term sometimes also included interpreting. Okay. Translation will thus be transferring our written text from SLA to TL conducted by translators in a specific social-cultural context. The written product or TT which result from that process and which functions in a social-cultural context of TL. The cognitive linguistics, visual and cultural and ideological phenomena which are integral part of 1 and 2. Okay. So here are the keys term in a translation studies. The use of a source language atom in the target language. Typically there are a culture atoms such as a French code or a Russian rubber which do exist in the source text or which are used to give a foreign character of the target text. The process whereby the individual elements of a source language atoms are translated literacy to produce target language equivalent finance. Source language atoms are translated to produce target language equivalently and history. Cataphor, the use of a linguistics atoms to refer forward to subsequent elements in the text. For example, in a speech, the king said, category shift a translation of a different text in the target language. For example, source text word text. Cognitive linguistics, a branch of linguistics which study the role of such mental processes as an inferior in the reasons necessary for processing text. Coherence, a standard which all volume-form texts must meet and which stipulates that the grammatically and lexically relationships hang together and makes overall sense as a text. Accessibility is a text-safe attitude in the communication. Accessibility in the sense that text receives accepts a language configuration as a cohesive and coherent text capable of utilization. Sentence to be judged grammatically or ungrammatically. Okay. Cohesion is the glue that sticks a sentence to any other in a paragraph or a paragraph to any other in a text. Cohesion describes the way in which text is tied together by linguistics device such and so we see. Additionally, therefore, however, when you describe the way in which a text is tied together by linguistics, however, on the other hand, communicable analysis, breaking down of lexical items into their basic meanings, components. Computational analysis is analysis of a word through structure, set of semantics features which are given as a present, absence, or indifference with a reference of features. For example, man plus mature, woman plus mature, boy plus male and mature. Okay. Context, the multi-layered extra-textual environment which exerts a determined influence of the language used. The ideologies of the speaker, on the other hand, will form a part of the context of a culture. Whether the translation is in a written form, oral, done, or a substacking, dubbing extra, it is divided into two parts. Context of a culture context look at the society the people live in and how their culture can affect their behavior and their opportunities. Things about where and when each text is set. The most powerful process in a society include religion, gender roles, attitude towards sex and a marriage, social states, class, job opportunities, inequalities, politics, authorities, figures, stereotype, identity, context of a situation. The context of a situation is the environment in which meanings are being exchanged and contains the three elements. Field refers to what happening, to know refers to who is taking part, mode of discourse refers to what part of the language is playing. Okay. Cotext, the other lexical items that occur before and after a word. Constructive analysis of a two or more different languages with the aim of identifying places, purpose, and electronical readable database of naturally product texts. For example, texts which have been written for genuine communicative purposes and not invented for analysis, which can be analysis by word, frequently collocation, extra by computer. Cross-culture pragmatics, the study of culturally different way of using languages and a different expectation among different members of a linguistic communication regarding how meaning is negotiated. Ideology, a body of ideas that reflects the beliefs and interests of an individual, a group of individual, a social institution, etc., and the ultimately finds expression in a language. And agencies use of non-human agents to cure of a process or actions. For example, tear cut down her checks. Okay. Intradictionalist preconditions for the initiality of the text involves the depend of one text upon other. Horizontally, intratextuality involves direct reference to any other text. Vertically, intratextual is more and allusion can refer to mode of writing. Intractual translation with the same language. For example, phrases are rewording, kinship atoms. Okay. Level shift, a shift between source target text lexical are viewers. Intratextuality, precondition of the intelligible of text involving the dependence of the text upon any other. Horizontally, intratextuality involves direct reference to any other text. Vertically, intratextuality is more and allusion can refers to mode of writing. Intra-regularity translation between two different languages. Interpreting spoken translation sometimes also called interpretation. Pragmatics, meaning the domain or a purpose of for which alternatives are used in a real context. Procedure, it says that a translation is process of translation. What happens as the translator worker on a translation. Product, the finished results from the translation process. Propositional content, what is involved in saying something that is meaningful and can be understood. Rank, term used by a hallucinatory refers to different linguistics units, namely morpheme, word, and sentence. Reception, the reaction TT receives from its reader. Published, review, or one instance of reception. In SLA culture, register the set of a feature with distinction one stretch of a language from any other in a term of context relating to language user. Resemblance, the relationship between ST and TT segments achieved through advances to relevant rewriting meta-linguistics processes, including translation, which can be set to preterm, alert, or generally manipulated text to survey as a variety of ideological motives. Purpose, the intention behind the production of a text. Scheme, a global pattern. A global pattern representing the underlying structure which accounts for the organization of a text. A segment story, for example, may consist of a number of episodes, each of which will include events and reactions. Okay. Next, we discuss an early history of disciplines of translation studies. Okay. Writing on the subject of translation go back in a record history. Practice of a translation was critical for the early dissemination of a key culture and region. The different way of translation were discussed by among others, and the practice of translation was critical for the early dissemination of the key culture and ancient texts and concepts. St. Jerome's his approach to translating the Greek Septuagint Bible into Latin would affect later translation of the scripture. In Western Europe, the translation of Bible was to be the battleground of conflicting ideologies for well over a thousand years, and especially during the Reformation in the 16th century. In China, it was the translation of a Buddhist that included a long discussed science and translation practice from the 1st century. St. Jerome suggested about how two-oriented translation can be considered. Any other example of a source-oriented theories? St. Jerome already stated that Bible translation must respect the exact form of a source text because God's word must not be tampered with, whereas in a casual text in a translator should be strive to render the meaning of the source and a text. In the last 34 years of his life, Jerome wrote the bulk of his work. In addition to tracts the monastic life and defense of theological practice, he wrote some history, a few biographies, and many Bible exegeses. Jerome also translated books of the Old Testament into Latin. While the amount of work he did was considerable, Jerome did not manage to make a complete translation of the Bible into Latin. However, his work formed the core of the Old Testament and eventually the accepted Latin translation known as Vulgate, the version of a Bible used by the Roman Catholic Church for over a million and a half. The Vulgate is a Latin translation of the original Bible text created mainly by St. John during the end of the 3rd and start of the 14th century. Vulgate derives from the phases or a common translation. Okay. Grammar translation. The study of the field developed into academic disciplines. In fact, from the late 18th century to 1960 and beyond, language learning in secondary schools in many countries had come to be dominated. This is an approach that persisted even today in a certain context. Typically of this is a following: rather a Brazil and deconstructional collection of a sentence to translate into a Spanish for the practice of Spanish tense use. Okay. Direct method and the communication approach. Grammar translation therefore fell into increasing disruption, particularly in many English language countries with the rises of alternative form of languages teaching such as direct method and the communicative approach from the 1960 to 1970. The communication approach stressed student natural capacity to learn languages and attempt to replicate authentic languages learning condition in the classroom. It often privileges spoken or written form, at least intentionally, and generally avoided use of the student's mother tongue. Translation workshop 1960 USA starting in Iowa
Princeton literary translation was promoted by the Translation Workshop concept. The Translation Workshop were intended as a platform of introduction of new translation into target culture and for the discussion of the finer principles of the translation processes and of understanding text. Comparative literature. Literature is study and comparative translation and transliterally necessitating the reading of a same work in a translation. Students and instruction in the field, usually called comparative, have traditionally been professionally in several languages and affiliated with the literary tradition, literary criticism, and major literary texts of those languages. Constructive linguistics is a practice-oriented linguistics approach that seeks to describe the differences and similarities between a pair of a language. Hence, it is the differences and similarities between a pair of language. Hence, it is occasional called differentiated linguistics. Constructed description can occur at every level of linguistic structure: speech, sounds, phonology, written symbols, graphology, word formation, morphology, word meaning, lexical collection, sentence structure, syntax, and complete discourse taxology. Study of translation. The more systematic linguistics oriented approaches to the study of translation being to emerge in the 1950 and 1960. There are a number of classical examples. Alfred Melbourne had done the same of a translation between French and a German. Geoffrey Moyne added a more example. Okay. This is a more systematic approach being to mark out the territory of the scientific investigation of translation. The word science was used by Nida in the title of his 1964 book, Towards the Science of Translation in 1964. Introduction to translation. Contents: the process of translation. Cathode definition of translation. Translation is the act of replacing text in the source languages SLA by an equivalent text in the target language, where not only superficially semantic equivalents are sought but also maxims of implied meaning and emotional effects and are transferred. This is the transfer grammar diagram, source language analysis, transfer, and target language synthetics. Analysis, decoding, transfer, synthetic, encoding are restructuring. Equivalence, translation losses. Tools of the translation. The translator must in a good command of both the source and the target language. In addition, he needs the following tools of the trade: dictionaries, references works, other works in the field of the source language text. First, dictionary, paper, electronics, general vocabularies, usage and idioms extra, unabridged, abridged, monolingual, bilingual. Monolingual dictionary, unabridged Oxford English Dictionary, OED, Random House Dictionary of English Language, American Heritage Dictionary of English Language, Webster New International Dictionary, and abridged short Oxford English Dictionary, Oxford Kansas Dictionary, COED, Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English, Oxford Advanced Learner Dictionary. Bilingual dictionary, English Arabic and Arabic English. Dictionary of usage and idioms. electronic dictionary online, computer-based software, and headline. Online dictionaries are Cambridge Dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster's, Oxford Dictionaries, Collins, Longman, Chamber, the Free Dictionary. These all are the online dictionaries. References Works, Dictionary of Specialized Terminology, Incorporates, Dictionary of Biography, who's Specialized Dictionary. Okay, so these are the World Books. Relevant material. If the translation is not familiar with the topic of the text he is transferring, he can search the internet or library for anything that will help him understand that material. Level of translation. The lexical level, factors that affect the meaning and choice of a word. The context, degrees of formality, date of the text, varieties of English. Abstract noun, synonyms, happiness, gladness, joy, enjoyment, delight, rapture, ecstatic, facilities, contentment, pleasure. And a culture-based word examples are romanticism, socialism, democracy. Concrete noun, some concrete nouns specific of a certain cultures are difficult to translate. Food, sushi, pizza, dress, kimono, sari, houses, igloo, tipi, transportation, rickshaw, and canoe. Okay. Proper noun are not translatable. Mr. Johnson does not become. Notice the historical dictionary of many proper nouns. The sentence level difference between the English and Arabic sentence need to be attended to. Study carefully the basic sentence pattern and the sentence types to be able to write correct English sentence. Okay. So these are the slides. Okay. Next, what is translation theory? Now we discuss the translation theory. The translation theory, translation view, a scientific investigation, both statistically and diagrammatic, of what goes on in the brain during the process of translating is remote and the present. Speculative. Some linguistics and translation theories make a fetish of diagrams, schemes, and models. Question sought to answer spectrally on the process of translation. What happens when translation translates? What is the process as it is essential that the balance be redressed through the systematic study of the process. It is a process which creates the product, and it is only by understanding the process that we can hope to improve skills as a translator. Systematic study of the process. The need for such a shift of attention has indeed already been argued for, and we strongly endorse the sentiment expressed. Part of the theory of translation will account for the process of moving from original text to mental representation. And how it differs from the original text. We must adopt a descriptive rather than a prescriptive approach to the investigation of the process. Recognize that purpose of translation is theory, perspective approach to investigate of the process, to reach an understanding of the process undertaken in an act of translation, and not to provide a set of norms of the perfect translation. Okay. Focus. Orientation towards the object of specification of the step and stages through which the translation works are as the source text in the original language is transformed into target text. Focus on the process which creates the translation rather than on the translation itself.
It is inappropriate to accept that a historical model of translation should solve all the problems a translator encounter. Instead, it should formulate a set of strategies for approaching problem and for coordinating the different aspects and related. There is a growing acceptance of translation study must be oriented toward description whether of a process or product and away from prescriptive term. Theory and model have just been used. We need to be clear with what cases mean and how they fit into the investigated process in which we are engaged. Theories, models, and analogs. Providing discussion. It is essential to distinction between sensation and perception, and that the process of sensation and perception are best examples by aggregate, whole, and system. Aggregated and whole phenomena studies by scientists fed into the mind through senses have boundaries but around them by the process of perceptions are thus converted into information being dated whole. It is the theory of the scientist which when passed on the other is realized as a model. Phenomena are observed and collected in the form of in a form of data whose cohesive character is explained by a theory which is transmitted to other in the form of model. Okay, so neither psycholinguistics nor neurology can yet provide a reliable information on how linguistic data are stored in the brain, how linguistic matching procedures take place, and what mental structures are active in recalling linguistics information. Okay. Theory is explanation of phenomena, the perception of a system and order in something observed. It is exist in the mind with no technical manifestation, an idea which consists the internal representation of phenomena. Model is in a contrast an external representation of the explanation and realization of the theory. It is exist as a technical object which stands for ideas embodied in the theory. Characteristics of model. It must faithfully represent the theory that it stands for. It must realize scientific characteristics of phenomena explained by theory. Should be copy of the original phenomena focusing of the essential part. It must have a heuristic function through analog. Requirements of a translation theory. Theory of translation. A theory of translation processes require a study of information processing and written that such a topic as a perception, memory, encoding and decoding messages. Theory of translation product require a study of a text not merely by means of translation level of linguistic analysis but also by making use of stylistics and recent advance in text linguistics and discourse analysis. Theory of translated text. Requirement for a theory of translation, both process and products, requires integral studies of both, such as a journal theory is examinable, the long-term theory of translation and translating. For the moment, at least, we are after a theory of translating, and given that there is a considerable agreement on the characteristic which a theory should possesses, we can state what our ideal theory should look like. 4 particular characteristics a theory must reflect. Emphasis, it must be testable. Determinism, it must be predictable.
parsimony, it is must be simple. Generality, it must be comprehensive. Okay. From the applied linguistics point of translation theory can be criticized for having limited its activities to the level of technique or at a best to that of method, when what is needed is principal approach from which the rest will flow. It might perhaps be more facilitable to think of developing an approach rather than a theory. If we adopt this plan of action, we can draw upon considerable expertise in applied linguistics from which the approach, method, technique series comes and produce a tentative initial list of what we might expect from a theory of translation. We are in a search of an integrated, interdisciplinary, multi-method and multi-level approach to the explanation of the phenomena of translation, and we will locate the approach within a broadly defined applied linguistics which will embrace in addition to learning of foreign language lexically and lexicography, speech pathology, stylistically language planning. Major figure in a translation theory inside or between language, human communication, equally translation. A study of translation is a study of language. How are we set about creating such an approach? Methodology investigating translation. The process of translation takes place in the mind of the translator, given that we have no direct access to it and shall be forced back into perceived unsatisfactory kind of description of the product which we have been saying that we wish to avoid. It is briefly legitimated to build up a model on the basis of inferences drawn from an objective study of the product. The development of psychology has shown a multiple approach involving both inductions and deductions, which is likely to be revealing than using only one approach. Any other issues the problem of the size of unit of translation. What is the unit of translation? It is the smallest segment of a source language text which can be translated as a whole in isolation from other segments, as small as possible, as large as necessary. Author question sought answers factual on the process of translation. What happened when translation translate? What is a process as it is? So these are the questions. Conclusion. Thank you. Okay. Introduction to contemporary study, contemporary translation study. Okay. The intended of today's presentation. The intended of today's presentation is distinction between the study of translation and the practice of translation. The traditional and conventional thinking about translation and the contemporary translation study. Why study translation? Because most of the important literary or critically texts can be read only through translation, because without translation we can't even read important work in any other Indian language, because many of the texts in your syllabus are translation. For example, Tagore. Because India is multilingual country and translation is important part of our cultural life, because translation have played extremely important role in the social and cultural history. Just as the objective of literary study is to enhance or increase the knowledge of various aspects of literature, like what is the relationship between literature and society, or a history, or what instance the purpose of translation study is to enhance or increase the knowledge of various aspects of translation, like what is relationship between translation and society or a history. Translational study versus translating. Just studying literature does not ensure that the student does not become a novelist or a poet. Studying translation does not ensure that a student will become a translator or a better translator. Sooner we get rid of this misconception of better. Translation studies are translating. The activity of translation is extremely essential. The first trace of translation known to use are a bilingual inscription during the Egyptian Old Kingdom as far back as 3000 BC. Translation. The belief about translation are as old as the activity itself. The earliest known, the most enduring theoretically thinking come from the Roman like Cyril 55 AD. The Romans believed that word-to-word translation was incorrect and result in acclamations and nuances which would hinder communication. Translation. About translation, you might have a hard work, various ideas about translation, like poetry is what lost in translation. Translation is like a woman. If she is beautiful, she is not a faithful, or if she is a faithful, she is not a beautiful. Translation always involves loss, and it is always approximated. Never translate word for word, or never translate literally. Translation should be faithful to the separate rather than the literature of the original. The conventional thinking about translation is older than the Roman thinkers like Cyril or Horace. Traditionally thinking about the translation is invariably dualistic, normative, and hierarchically invariably compresses the translation with the original, and is invariably sees the translation as an inferior and secondary to the original. We consider the translation from the point of view of the source text and language. It is a primarily focused on the practice of translating. Contemporary translation study. The discipline of translation study is a very recent in 1978. Indoor Lefort proposed that the name translation studies be adopted for the disciplines that concern itself with the problem raised by the production and description of a translation. Until then, most of the thinking about the translation was focused on the practice of translating, like what is the best way to translate, what is the good translation, is translation is possible. The theoretical perception with large questions like what is the relationship between translation and a society, what role does translation does the dominate. So ideologically outlook of the society and the translate affect translation activity. How does translation affect ideological in the society and really recent? Some of the significant contemporary translation study focus on the function and the role of translation in a target language and a culture, and the role of the target language culture in the process of translation. It is often descriptive in its approach. Some of the significant contemporary approaches to translation are descriptive. Translation study associated with the get drawn, rewriting, or manipulating social associated with anti-Lafria and approaches associated with anti. Many contemporary approaches like the post-colonial approach to translation and a culture study approach to translation. See translation as an ideology activity involving politics of representation, which can only be understand its social, culture, and historical context. The rejection of the ideas that translation is a secondary or inferior to the original, and assumptions that translate can be understood only in its culture and historical context are a central. Our contemporary translation study also provide an interesting critical perspective on a translation. For example, Meswat with the non-Bengali original resumes the English sensibility, he modified or mutated it, and he wrote his poem to create to his Victorian audience. It examines aesthetic culture phenomena like soup translation or reverse translation. For instance, it can examine cases like a song from Tagore's Gangatis, which was translated from Bengali to English by Tagore, then Pablo Neruda translation into Spanish, which was later translated into English, and then from English it was retranslated into Bengalis. Attention to the gender basis behind the belief that the translation is like a woman, unfaithful when pretty and not beautiful when faithful. He says that the fidelity is defined as an implicated contract between translation as a woman, as original, as a husband, father, or author. However, the infamous double standard operated here as it might have in a country traditionally marriages the unfaithful wife. Translation is a publicity tried for a crime. The husband original is by law incapable of communicating this contract. In a short, makes it impossible for the original to be guilty of infidelity. This can be gone beyond the discussion. It takes exciting new question about translation and see translation powerful culture practice instead of secondary activities. Okay. So RNA translation transfer A from textile to the ribosomal protein synthetic machinery. Translation is a process which indeed to find meaning equivalences in the target text. Translation is a communication of the meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language's text. Generally, translation is a process of rendering meaning ideas or message of a text from one language to other language. It is necessary to understand the concept of translation as a mandated by many translation theorists to obtain an overall picture of translation processes. Different definition of translation. Due mark indicate that translation is rendering the meaning of a text into any other language in the way that the author intended the text. Nate and Tabor, and on other hand, state that translating consisting in a reproducing in the respective language the closest neutral equivalent of the source of language message. Hatim and Murder define translation, the process of transferring writing text from source language SLA to target language. Bell views translation as a replacement of a text in one language by an equivalent text in any other language. Translation consists of studying the lexical, grammatical structures, communication situation, and the culture context of the source language text. All these are analyzed in order to determine its meaning. This same meaning is then reconstructed using the lexicon and grammatical structure which are appropriated in the target language and its culture context. For example, if we use Arabic as a source language and English as a target, and a Muslim becomes the source text whose lexical, grammatical structure, communication, situation, and culture context are analyzed in order to determine its meaning. The meaning is then reconstructed using the lexicon and a grammatical structure which are appropriated in the target language. To that extent, skills needed to be a good translator, excellent writing skills. Translators are expected to be a professional writer, so they need to be knowledgeable about grammar, vocabulary, and style of the language. These in popular belief to translate, a person only needs writing skills. Translators are expected to be a professional writer, so they need to be knowledgeable about grammar, vocabulary, and style of two languages. Researcher translate may get very different texts, translate from one day to the next, so that they have to do research as much as possible. Good culture awareness intended meaning mostly determined by the culture implication in addition to textual meaning. Reasonable knowledge of a foreign language. You need to be able to read widely and easily in your foreign languages and understand not only what it says but what it really means. Not always the same thing. Lots of practices reading, watching TV and films, listening to radio in your foreign languages will help. A long wide experiences and a few dictionaries. Good and bad translation. It is in fact virtually impossible except in extreme cases to draw a line between what counts a good translation and what counts a bad translation. Every translation has a point of strength and a point of weaknesses. Every translation is an open improvement. Properties of good translation. It must make a sense. It must convey the spirit and manner of the original. It must have a natural and easy form of expression. It must produce a similar response. High quality translation. It must be many things, easily understand, well written, through the spirit of original as well as the meaning, through the context of the origin in a term of histories and culture, and able to accept that which is implicit in the original without destroying the meaning. Good translation. Creating a good translation is a matter of grammar, vocabulary, and culture knowledge. You must be familiar with all aspects of the source and target language in order to render one. Okay. Translation is the replacement of textual material in one language as served by equivalent textual material in another language. Translation is blending the meaning of text into any other language in the way that the author intended the text. Okay. Translation is to study the lexical, grammatical structure, communication, situation, and cultural context of the source language, analyzing it in order to determine its meaning, and then reconstructing the same meaning using lexical and grammatical structure which are appropriated in the respective language and its culture. process of translating original text, analyze, interpreting, receiving, analyzing translation text. Main purposes of analysis: understanding what it is about by reading, learning the leadership, age, education, gender, learning the skills, degree of language, stylistic scales, officially formal, neutral, taboos, officially the consumption of any nutriment is established. Formal, you are requested not to consume food in this establishment. Neutral, eating is not allowed here. Informal, please do not eat here. Continue, you can't feed your face here. Slang, lay of nosh, taboo, lay of the fucking nosh. Stylistic scales and translation. Degree of formality, source of languages, target languages, officially, formal, neutral, informal. The approaches of analysis: you start translations sentence by sentence for say the first paragraph or a chapter to get the feel and the tone of the text, and then you deliberate it, sit back, review the position and read the rest of SLA. You read the whole text 2 or 3 times and find the intention registered to tone, mark the difficulties, words and passages, and start translating only when you have taken your bearing. Time management: analyze 10%, interpreting 40%, revising 40%, finalizing 10%. Metaphor assembly: figure of speech used to replacement arbitrary languages in order to help others understand or enjoy the message. The substitution of one idea and objective with another. Kinds of metaphor: dead metaphor, living metaphor. Dead metaphor, a metaphor which has lost its poetic meaning and not considered as a figure languages any longer due to its frequent use. Example: economical vehicles, gain step extra. Living metaphor, considering a figured languages and still contains poetic meanings. An angry sky, you are loose among thorns. Strategies of translation: metaphor, translation of metaphor by reproducing the same image, translation of metaphor by replacing the image in assembly with the stand image in DL. Translation of metaphor is simile by sense, translation of metaphor by metaphor and simile plus sense. Translation of metaphor as simile, translation of metaphor by metaphor as simile plus sense, translation of metaphor by simile. Translation of metaphor by reproducing the same image. Translation method or simile by sense. Germanic, the impossible thing we were dangerous. The best advertisers is found on the pillow, splash association of metaphor, simile, time has wings, simile, template is in a separatic foreground. This place is just like a grave. Transposition is a translation procedure involving a change in a grammar from SL to PL, modalize malvectrin and pregnancies method, a shift from singular into plural. Okay. A structural change that involves word position in a phrases, long dark hair, phrases with adverb, a structural change that involves word position in a sentence, shift a change in a part of a speech. Okay. Linear machine. So here we discuss 8 different types of translation services. The world of translation is a vast and very fun. There are different translation techniques, drives, theories about translation, and different translation services types, including technical translation, judicial translation, and certified translation. And the first is technical translation. The term technical translation can be understood in two ways. In its broadcast sense, it is about translation uses mainly instructionally flat internal mode. Medical translation, financial reports, means of proceeding, administrative terms in journal and so forth. These documents share the distinction of being for a specific and limited target audience and usually have a limited shelf life. In its most limited sense, technical translation refers to technical documentation such as engineering, IT, electronic machines, and industrial text in general. Technical translation requires a knowledge of a specialized terminology used in a sector of the source text. So here is the next. Scientific translation, a subgroup of technical translation as its name indicated. Scientific translation deals with a document in the domain of a science article. These papers, colloquial conference presentations, studies, reports, etc. Financial translation. Financial translation, of course, deals with the documentation relating to the life of finance, banking, stock exchange activity. This including company and accounts and reports, financial statement and financially contract, financially packs, and so forth. Legal translation covers a wide range of different documents. They may include legal documents such as the summons and warrants, administrative texts such as registration certification, corporate state and imitation draft, technical documents such as experts' opinion and text of judicial purposes, and a number of other texts in addition of report and minutes of court proceed. So the next is judicial translation. Judicial translation, not be confused with the legal certification, refers to the task of translation undertaken in a court setting. Judicial translate specialized in a translation documents such as letters, regulatory minutes of a proceeding, judgment, expert opinions, and deposition minutes of interrogation session, etc. Judicial translation refers to legal being documentation. For example, it could be translation of a document such as a law, regulation and degrees, general sales and purchase condition, legal binding contracts such as a label license and a commercial contract, partnership agreement, abroad protocol, conventional international regulation, insure political and bail insurance, among other. The judicial translate must have a solid legal background in addition to their linguistics training. Certificate translation. The certified translation or sovereign translate may use their signature to authenticate official translation. There are as well as providing translation of civil state documentation, material agreement, divorces, settlement, decades, and while, for example, literary translation. This is probably the hardest of all the different kinds of translation. So obviously the translation must first try to render the semantic content of the original text, as should be the case for the translation of any kind of a text, and then in addition deal with a number of other difficult such as polysomic wordplay specific to literary texts, as behind a word or a phrase there lie a number of connotations which the writer has tried to transmit a hint at a subtle. Translation is the field seeing a lot of activities nowadays. Thanks to increasing globalization of business, international travel has also increased significantly for both business and layers. This means there is at any given time a large number of people in a country that do not necessarily speak the local language well. Of course, this argues well for the translation industries. There are many different types of translations that may be required, and each one is unique with its own process and specific requirements. If you are a business with international business, it will be beneficial to pattern up and experiences professionally a translation services company who is capable of understanding your specific requirements and accommodation them. Experienced translation services profession, whether working individual or as a part of a company, can provide it exactly the kind of translation services you need, but also help you with the thinking, like creating a glossary, a translation memory TM. When computers are used to speed up the process, other access that become very valuable and assist in the creation of content that is a consist and can be used, eventually translating into a cost reduction and saving time through the elimination of a duplication of effort on your part. It's important that you have a meeting with your services provider to aspire them of your exact needs. The more information you can give them about your business, your target market, the easier it is will be for them to provide you them best services possible. If you can do try to specific information term used in industries, and style guide also provides some training session to familiarize them with the product of a services you offer. Translation can be broadly classified into two: business related, non-business related. However, some of kinds overlap in both categories. So let's us examine that most common type of translation that are performed: literary translation. First of all, the name is pretty self-explanatory. Literary translation refers to translation of the literary works like stories, novels, poems, and plays. It is often considered the highest form of a translation because the literary translation is so much more than the mere conveying the meaning and context of a document in the source languages into target languages. It involves incorporating the appropriate cultural necessaries, feeling, emotions are suitable elements of the particular work. Many literatures believe that it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to translate work of literature, especially poetry. Some examples of situations that could be very difficult are rhyming words, puns, idioms, and every type translation joke into other languages. If you will understand this, have not felt that did not seem as a funny when translate. Often many suitable connections the writer has hinted at are lost in translation. Then there is a matter of individual writing style of the author. The translation has a tough job in attempting to convey that unique software localization. Of course, the main thing to translate is user interface, but software localization does not end there. It includes error message, some system message, help field, so on. Here too, the content need to be adapted to suit the local culture at time. The translate may be the localized software, any incorporated numerous particle and linguistics issues. Hence, it's a vital that it are truly tested before releasing. The part translate services companies often have a multiple languages testing centers to test localized software. Commercial translation, this type of a translation is necessary in a translator to process of specialized skills like knowledge of the business jargon and the industry to which the business belongs. The types of a text in the translation of commercial documents could include business correspondence, reports, trends, documents, legal translation. This is one of the most complex translation and involve both certificate translation and marriage certificate translation, translating contract, agreement, trades, memorandum, will, and so on. A good translator needs to understand the various underlying contexts of the document and that of the two regions of a countries for which the documents are intended, the social culture aspects and the political legal aspects as well. They will then need to translate in a manner that the target audience easily grab the text, even if you are familiar with the cultures and the other aspects are highly skilled and translate. You may need to consult legal professionals so as to ensure that your translation is a completely and error-free. Technical translation, a technical content that need to be translated, use a guide, manual, online help text, instruction, booklet, training material and videos, marketing material for technical fields like manufacturing, science or engineering. All of this comes in the ambit of a technical translation. Formatting is an important aspect where the translation of a technical content is concerned. As desktop published DTP is required for it, using a content management system or CMS will help you to keep a cost down. Formatting is an important aspect where the translation of a technical content is a concern. As a desktop publishing or a DTP is required for it. As a translation services provide, it will be worth inventing and efficient and TM's translation system. It can even a thin error may result in a huge marketing. Juridical translation, yes, this type of translation is a different from legal translation. The latter is about to translation legal document which could be very old too, but when we talk about juridical translation, we basically refer the activity of translation court documents like a deposition, minutes of meeting, expert testaments, witness, and administrative translation in the Realm of translation administrative reference to the translation of management text similar to commercial translation. It is not exactly the same. While administration translation can be called as a subset of a commercial translation, all commercial translation is not necessarily administrative. Medical translation, any medical content that is patient related like label, packing, instruction or software, and content that is a product related like research paper, clinical, trial paperwork, quality management certificate and the like usually need to translation. It is absolutely imperative that the translation services provide are experiences, have the required knowledge, and in country of professional translation of a medical document can also be very tricky as the requirement of translation can differ from country to country, as translation or a company specialized in a medical document will be user best bet as the will be familiar with the interactive of all the different requirements. If you want to the best translation services provide who follow a high level of quality control like a company with ISO website translation. We are course taking about website copies, subtitle for videos on your web pages and any document you have there. Here you will also need to change things like a currency, address, format and layout. So as to appeal to the different local audience, you need to think about the language you want your website to be translated into and localize on those pages which will apply to the target audience. Using website translation management system to automate and easy the process. If you have a frequent update your website copy. Script translation. Many popular movies and TV shows that come out of the Hollywood are dubbed into several languages and released worldwide. Sometimes the films are from foreign languages dubbed into English and the European languages like the Telugu language, Blockbuster from India, Bahubali, which are released in China and German among other languages. The Harry Potter series was also released into dozens of the languages, but of these releases happen, the script have to be translated first. And the dialogues, you can say this is the type of a literary translation, but it's not exactly the same. It can be a very decided and tendency punchlines, jokes or catch phrases into any other language to make the same impact is a very difficult with the more movie being released in a multiple languages nowadays. This type of a translation is a very much in a demand today. Multimedia localization, videography, animation, GIFs all can be grouped under a multimedia, and this is a very important today as more as companies as are creating multimedia content to find their audience reach and keep them engaged. Localize this content can get quick through it make look simple from the outside as it has to appropriate for the local culture and appeal to the customer in that region. If you do not do correctly, you could end up offending your audience and drive them away. Financially documentation translation. Financially document like bank record statement, account statement and more sometimes need to be translated to make it easier for the target audience to comprehend. Here the actual content that you need to translate may be lesser, but it has to be done precisely. You may also be required to change the currency, in which case you will need to also convert the figure. Conclusion. Of course, there are more translation types such as a literary, legal, financially, extra, and there are all different kinds of process and technologies that can work for the different types of translation projects. what makes sense for one translation type might not work for any other. Translation Day provide legal document translation for all kind documents. It has been able to build an undisputable trust with their promote and accurate interpretation. It has become a first rising player in the translation industry. So these all are the types of translation studies. First is different types: literary translation, software localization, and commercial translation, legal translation, technical translation, and the other is juridical translation, administrative translation, medical translation, website translation, script translation, multimedia localization, financial document translation. So these all the types of translation. In this video I will discuss with you the types of translation, introduction, theory of translation, history of translation, why we study translation studies, and what type of answer we receive after studies the translation studies. Okay, thank you so much. I hope you like my video and understand all the concepts which I provide you. Allah Hafiz.